Most men nowadays can't even say their wife because they're so terrified that they're going to end up one of these astronomical statistics for divorce. They can almost say almost nothing is there worth protecting. Therefore, what is there worth dying for if it's not even worth protecting? Right? People don't even want to protect their own churches anymore because they fly the wrong colors, as it were, right?
Yeah.
It's very skittly colors that are on these different churches these days.
We see the lack of religiosity, the lack of traditional values in our society. And again, it comes back to blaming men.
All that great adjustment you're talking about, that comes from seeing self-sacrifice.
Right.
And the brutal self-sacrifice that daddy who worked 60 hours a week and still had time to throw the old ball around or whatever, it's necessary for the core, especially of women. It's a big deal.
O Lord of hosts, be with us, for we have none other help in times of adversity but Thee. O Lord of hosts, have mercy on us.
What I've come to realize over several years of listening to progressive and atheist content, listening to right-wing content, Republican content, their kind of viewpoints and things like this, I realize that the entire sickness that this nation has revolves around materialism and the overwhelming want for material gain being paramount. It's paramount to their worldview. And that's why they don't care about things like the birth rate. They don't care about things like the explosion of mental illness. They don't, because it's a fundamentally selfish worldview. And what I think most people, when they're trying to address this sickness, they want to address the progressives on a surface level, but you can't really do that. You have to kind of dive underneath into the grounding foundations and their principles. And you have to understand that for an atheist, nothing means anything, really. It's all subjective nonsense. There's no reason for them not to be selfish. You have to give them a reason not to be selfish. Well, other than religion, what is that reason?
Right.
And the answer is there isn't one at all.
Exactly.
There isn't one. So why in the world do these people need to have kids? Well, they'll tell you they don't. What do I need to have kids for? They think when they're dead, they're gone anyway. Who cares? A kid is an endless money sink. They don't get anything out of it anymore. It's not like they can go and, fill their farm with 15 children, 15 young strapping men to help them with their farming chores or help them with their family dynasty, which is how things traditionally have been for thousands of years in human history. Children were a necessity just for you to survive. For your tribal health, for your personal health, for the core of the tribe and the family. It wasn't optional to have children. It was a survival mechanism.
Right.
And now it's not. And so you have to find some way to bridge this massive gap which exists. And the gap focuses on, tell me why I need to have a child. I can't give you a material reason anymore. And we used to be able to. 500 years ago, I could say, look, you need to breed, you stupid atheist, because otherwise the tribe's going to die out, and my life's going to suck worse, and yours is going to suck worse. Okay, you can give them kind of a selfish reason for it, but you can't do that now. Life is pretty good. The fridge is full of food. There's running water. There's everything you could masturbate to on the internet. It's everything that they could ever want is sitting right there for them. So what's the reason for them to be fundamentally unselfish besides religion? Nothing. So from my understanding, my pushing of Christian nationalism is to say it's a slow, progressive in our way, move towards
progressive in their way.
Right. It's a move towards just slowly rejecting more and more materialism, and replacing it with obedience to God and the duty that one has to his family and community. So it's a mix of deontological ethical systems, which is Christian ethics. And the push for that is just one thing, really. It can all be condensed to one thing. The porn addiction, the mental illness, the transgender phenomenon, all these different phenomenons can really be boiled down to materialism. And so our push is just to try to slowly push that out. And it's going to take a long time. It's going to take 100 years, right? It may take longer than that, but we're okay with that. We know that nothing is done overnight, and anybody who tells you and sells you as a savior, anybody who tells you within my lifetime we're going to turn it all around, anybody who tells you, we're going to storm that building and that'll be the end of it, they're feeding you a crock of shit. Changing the moral paradigm of an entire population is a supreme undertaking. So, this is the philosophy behind real Christian nationalism.
Yeah, well, I think the materialism, we can see the deleterious effects of that in our own culture. And like you said, the value systems. For a member stream I'll be doing tomorrow night, I read the book, Man and Technics by Oswald Spengler, and he talks about how decadence and luxury is tied to urbanization, whether it be Baghdad in the, in the ancient period, or the Islamic caliphate, or Rome. I mean, you look at all these major centers throughout history that when urbanization began to grow, you see decadence, you see luxury, and then you see the materialism emerge. You see
and
push against the struggle of life.
It's a stage by stage, and it's been made worse now with industrialization. Industrialization with these big urban communities created this huge economic sector of wealth. The poorest people on planet Earth breed, and the richest don't. The people who have the most do the least amount of breeding. The people who have the least do the most amount of breeding. That seems backwards and counterintuitive, but it's not really. And the reason it's not is because people who don't have a lot of material things and a lot of material wealth, what do they focus on? They focus on community, and they focus on family. They don't have the video games and the porn helmets, right? They have something that's totally different to focus on, and guess what? Their happiness index is through the roof, whereas our mental health crisis here and in the West is astronomical.
It's an absence of meaning. And last night in our members meeting, we were talking about, really an idea that I want to do a stream on, and it hits right on this: women not having children and men not working to the same capacity. Because if we look back to scripture, due to the fall, these are sort of the conditions of mankind. The women have to deal with the birth pangs, and the man must toil and labor. And so we look at the state of the world right now in its inversion. It's sort of taking away the sort of honorable ability for men to work in the capacity that they should, and then women are avoiding birthing and having children. And in a way, it's like this artificial movement away from the conditions that God has put us in the fall for the redemption of our own souls and salvation.
Well, I mean, there's not only is there a lot of truth to that, but I mean, it kind of ties in the messaging perfectly. And by the way, Jim Bob says you're wrecking me right now. In this brutal drag out debate, I am being wrecked. It's true.
Shout out to Jim Bob.
Yeah. Andrew destroyed by facts and logic, says Brotime, right? But anyway, you are right, and the big tie-in there kind of moves into this fact that your whole life and the meaning of your whole life is not supposed to revolve around stuff and things and junk and garbage and crap. It's not, and we're not saying either have a rejection of wealth. You know what I mean? You can be a wealthy man and not a materialist. It's a mindset. It's a mindset more than it's anything else, but it's so easy when things are so easy to slip away from what you're supposed to really be doing in your life. What you're supposed to be doing in your life is having a family, breeding, and doing everything you can to sacrifice your time, energy, effort, and resources into pushing that family to be better than you were, to give them a better life than you had, and make them more to continue to push the line. And yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, well, and that's part of why the physical capabilities of man compared to women has to do with that. Our duty is to work, is to labor for something, and that women have an ability that we don't have, and that is for the nurturing and the providing of children in the sort of emotional sense. Obviously, we provide financially, or again through that work. But this absence of meaning in our society, especially for young men, you look at gangs and the young men joining gangs and how prevalent this is. But what is there for young men to die for? I think there's an essential part of all men is that there has to be something, a group identity, your religion, your tradition, your family, something that you're willing to die for. And so many men don't have anything that they would really die for.
Well, what's there to protect?
Fight for to the death.
What's there to protect? Most men nowadays can't even say their wife because they're so terrified that they're going to end up one of these astronomical statistics for divorce, right? They can almost say almost nothing is there worth protecting. Therefore, what is there worth dying for if it's not even worth protecting, right? People don't even want to protect their own churches anymore because they fly the wrong colors, as it were, right? It's very skittly colors that are on these different churches these days. So what has happened is, you're right. There is nothing to die for. There's not even anything worth protecting. So it's a loss of direction. But this, interestingly enough, this phenomenon, as you dive into the statistics and into the arguments, you recognize that the most vulnerable set of society is actually women. This has devastated Western women to the point that their identity is completely null and void. They don't even have one, right? They just consider themselves now to be interchangeable widgets with men, and they hate it. And their mental health is just completely obliterated. Men still seem to try to find some kind of group identity. For instance, I'll give you an example. I do know men who would die for their sports team. Okay, I'm not kidding. They would die for their, for the guy throwing the pigskin around. They're like, these are the guys who dress up, put on the face paint, do the whole 9 yards. You know what I mean? I'm serious. I'm pretty confident some of them would give their life for the 49ers, right?
It's unfortunate.
Not kidding. But it kind of ties into what you're saying, is that you need that group identity, in anything that's available is better than nothing. But men seem to still try to be able to find it. We still try to make men's groups. We still try to have clubs. We still try to have social relationships because we know how to be friends. Like, for instance, I have traditions with some of my friends where every single weekend for years, we met up every Saturday morning and had breakfast. And what we would do is we would switch the person who had to pay during the breakfast. And the reason for that is because the next week it's somebody else's turn. They better show up, right?
Right.
It was like an enforcement mechanism that we had just to make sure everybody showed up. And it was just part, like you say, of group identity. But what's happened with women is their identity's completely obliterated now.
And I think because they're competing with men, because, again, like you said, they're sort of widget pushing, career oriented, that in their own worldview, by the sort of prevalence of women in the workforce themselves, men are a necessary adversary, and just the pursuit for jobs and the pursuit for money, career opportunities. And so then the unhappiness that they still feel it must be due to the men, and as opposed to maybe we're just not occupying these roles that give us deeper meaning in life. And that's where, some of the work that your wife has done with talking about being a stay-at-home mother. You don't have to. Now, some women may be gifted. Some women may have natural talents. God gives them talents. Maybe they do work in certain ways, but I would venture to say that most women would get way more meaning out of being home with their children, giving them that emotional support, spending time with them, nurturing them, as opposed to working a 9 to 5 to make so much money so that they can go do things than to deal with and drink away their unhappiness. Like these wine bars. Again, last night in the members meeting, we were talking about these wine bars that are popping up. A gentleman was over in Napa, one of my buddies. And it's totally geared and oriented towards women, and getting them to come there. It was like Wine Chick or something's the name of it. And it's like, men used to go to the pub. Well, now they're creating wine bars for women to go there after they go to work.
Well, it's true. And one of the facts that nobody really wants to admit, and I think it's very difficult for modern society to understand this, but women have always gotten their identity from men. Mm-hmm. They've always been in a support role. And it's not a lesser role in society. That's what people don't understand. We're not supposed to hate on women or be dumbass incels or this crazy batshit stuff that they're talking about as a reaction to the fact that women are no longer in the supportive role for society they're supposed to be in. They're supposed to be teachers for young men in many ways. They've always been that way, right? They're always been heavy supporters in communities.
Right.
They've always been people who deal with localized issues, why men go off and fight wars, or they're off in hunting groups, things like this. They're a necessary part. They are the other half of us, right?
Right.
It's not that they shouldn't be glorified in society the correct way. It's just understanding where to place the glory.
Right.
And the identity from women comes from the identity of men, meaning if you have a good support structure of women in your tribe, village, nation, whatever, you're going to have a very healthy nation. You're going to have a very healthy tribe. You're going to have a very healthy community, but only if they understand that the core of what they end up becoming is when they tie themselves to the other half, which is the man. They have that man's babies. Of course, that part of their identity is going to come from that relationship, the biggest part of their identity. That's why women suffer so badly, I think, when men aren't in their lives and they're raised by single moms, is that male identity. I can't tell you how many times, and everybody has a daughter is going to understand this, and all the women who are listening to this who had dads in the home, there's nothing on planet Earth that's more comforting for a woman than dad, right?
Right.
Than throwing their arms around dad. Dad's going to make things okay. Dad's going to make things, and it's such a core part of how they understand men and how they understand their own social role that they can't actually do that without having male figures around. So it's very difficult in modern society where they're just explained as interchangeable widgets. And it's kind of disgusting to me. And in many ways, it's, well, not many, it's just totally disgusting to me. They're not interchangeable widgets. Men aren't women. Women aren't men. And it can't happen like that long term. It's terrible for everybody.
Well, and you talk about the role of the father, and I recently looked at a study on the religiosity of fathers within families, and a starking example was how, so it was looking at generational effect, what the children's religions are once they become adults. And if the father is religious, and so it was looking at basically Christians, if they go to church and the children and the wife goes with them, it was like in the 70 percentile, the children would identify as Christians when they became adults. But if the father didn't go and they just went with the mother, it dropped down to like the 30 percentile, high 20%. And so like men orienting themselves and actually becoming leaders, not just for the family, but then in society itself, it's what gives, it is the compass. It is how we have orientation. And we see the lack of religiosity, the lack of traditional values in our society. And again, that's really, it comes back to blaming men.
It's also, it all comes from, so that all that great adjustment you're talking about, that comes from seeing self-sacrifice.
Right.
And the brutal self-sacrifice that daddy who worked 60 hours a week and still had time to throw the old ball around or whatever, you know what I mean? It's necessary for the core, especially of women. It's a big deal. Men have a better time, not much better, by the way, but they have a better time even raised in a single mother household of being able to readjust in society. For women, it's almost no chance. For women coming out of a single mother household, their brains are completely destroyed from the day they leave that household, if they ever do. Their brains are rotten. There's something wrong upstairs. Their ticker doesn't work correctly. You know what I mean? And it never really goes back, I think, to working correctly. They spend the whole rest of their life trying to recapture what it was that they lost. And it's like it breaks their brain. You know what I mean?
Right.
And this is again, it all comes down to materialism being the staunch representation for the major issue in society, which is the selfishness of men, which bleeds over to women. And I mean, women can't lead themselves. They can't.
Right.
They need us for that. And if we're so busy putting on the porn helmet and playing fucking video games all day that we're not going to self-sacrifice for our own families, we're not doing them any good either. And then, of course, you have moms who are just walking out because they want to go blow the neighbor because they don't feel fulfilled. You know what I mean?
Right. Well, you're talking about the materialism too. I think this is a great bridge even into then what the Crucible is doing as a debate platform is getting back to women not having babies and men not working and having that work ethic in the same way. Again, two ways in which we're sort of living artificial lives because according to scripture, this is again the sort of situation of men and women due to the fall is that men have to work and women have the birth pangs. But we're moving into a sort of artificial reality itself. And if you're just a materialist, that artificial reality is really appealing. But the Crucible talking about transcendentals, metaphysics, presuppositions, forcing then people to realize, wow, I do believe in a lot of things that aren't material. And this eventually leads you that there has to be a God because there's a lot of things that aren't tangible, you can't touch, that you absolutely believe in. And most of the time you believe in those things more so than some of the stuff you can touch.
Well, right. Again, the point of it is to allow people to have a foundational worldview from which to argue from. For the Orthodox, it's often transcendentals, or tag is where they take a lot of their argumentation, wanting to get to the ground root of the biggest critique against Christianity for the last 2,000 years, which has been the atheist perspective of materialism, right? That's what it is. The rejection of transcendentals, even though they presuppose the existence of those transcendentals just to operate inside of material reality to begin with.
Exactly.
But while this is a great purview for the Orthodox who come on to debate, and while I'm Orthodox myself and so is my wife, it's not a debate channel that's designed for the Orthodox perspective specifically, but for the perspective of all people with a different viewpoint who want to argue that viewpoint. Be they ANCAPs, progressives, atheists, all of them are welcome to come after the core foundation. You just can't get mad if the Orthodox keep on beating the shit out of that. Like, that's your problem, right? That's not my problem. Okay, that's your problem. But they're all welcome to come and argue from at least their own paradigm. And some of them might want to argue from something that's very normative that they agree on. Maybe they both are utilitarians and they just want to argue about utilitarian ethics, or they want to argue about something that's going on in the political sphere from a consequentialist standpoint. That's fine, but we're not going to force them to adhere to some type of normative structure that we want in order to convey their ideas. And that's what makes the Crucible better than everything else that's out there.
Right. Well, let's get into, like, how did you become Orthodox? What was your religion growing up? Were you guys Protestant Christians? You grew up in an atheist home? Like, how did you grow up?
So I hesitate a bit.
You're a Mormon.
Well, no. I'll tell you a bit of it, but I hesitate to give too much personal backstory because I have enemies that have literally tried to kill me and are going to continue to do so. So,
what you feel comfortable sharing then?
But let me tell you, I'll kind of tell you where I came. So both my parents were Protestant. My dad grew up in a very heavily religious household, and my mom not so much. My mom got into the occult, and she was a witch for most of her youth, all through her 20s. And she was a coven witch, and she was into very, very deep black magic. My dad was a very staunch conservative. I mean, very, like, did you ever see that show? What was it with that kid Alex? Was it Growing Pains? I don't remember what it was. Remember the the kid, the Keatons, right? It was the Keatons. Was it Alex Keaton was the character? It was Michael J. Fox played him.
It's something Kirk that played the youngest son.
Yeah, I don't remember, right? But I just remember the character. Yeah, Alex P. Keaton. Yeah, he was always a buttoned up, very, very proper conservative style, and that was my old man. He was very much. He grew up out of sync with the 90s time frame that I grew up in. Because he was born in the early 40s. So he was. So I learned this whole kind of staunch ethical system that was kind of 55 years, 60 years out of place. That never really fit in very well. Well, my parents took me to various churches. They wanted me to get into Christianity as much as possible, and I always did in a way. But I kind of paid it lip service because I'll tell you some of the weird stuff that I didn't like. I didn't like the stupid ass hand waving, right? I hated the hand. So you'd go into a church, right? And I always liked it when they would read the Bible and do the sermon. So I'd always ask, I'd be like, can I just like sit out in the car for 45 minutes and you can call me when they start reading the Bible? Because the last thing I want to do is go in and listen to Christian rock and watch a bunch of assholes doing this. And here's what they'd be doing.
Yeah.
Right? What the fuck is it? Right? And I just loathed it. Right? And I also didn't see it as being pertinent to anything. I was like, what the hell does that have to do with anything? I'm not there for hand waving and, reaching to the sky. And it was just all seemed like virtue signal bullshit, and it was.
Right.
Intuitively, I kind of understood that it was. Well, getting me to go into a church was not an easy thing to do, because I also was raised with this idea that you were your own church, right? You could just read the Bible and you could figure it out. And, what did you even really need church for except a sense of community? And I didn't really want much to do with it. So I stuck with always identifying as a Christian and being very heavy in reading my Bible. But I wouldn't say I was very devout or acted very devout, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Once the LGBTQ stuffs really started to move in to Protestant churches, I was just pretty much done. I felt like the whole thing had been infiltrated from the ground up.
What year would you say this is? I mean, give me a
man.
timeline in your own life.
Let's try going back to probably 2015.
2015.
When I was really just probably had enough. When my wife and I would, we would discuss Christianity often and all the time. We thought we had it all figured out because we had our own headcanon. After all, we had read the Bible. We knew what it meant,
Right.
But when she started to kind of dive into Orthodoxy, and she would come and start arguing with me about it, she asked me some questions that I had to think on that I didn't have any answers for, and I couldn't give logical answers for. And she asked me if I'd go to, and check out an Orthodox church. I said, yeah. So we walked in, and that was it. It only took once before I understood, oh, shit. Pretty much the foundational blocks of almost everything that I have believed Christianity to be was completely flawed from the gate. And I never even knew Orthodoxy existed. I had no idea that what it was. You know what I mean? The schisms were never explained. None of that was ever explained, and I never really took the time to dive into it. So I was fortunate that basically through some systematic arguments with the wife, she finally convinced me to walk into an Orthodox church, and that was it.